Live from the studios of News Talk 1480 WHBC, it's Kenny and JT.
So Browns lose on Sunday to the Dallas Cowboys 33-17, and they looked unprepared. The offense was inept. Deshaun Watson was horrible. We find out Friday his dad passed away. Saturday a former teammate of his passed away. He elects to still play, does not play well. Then the aftermath on Monday, looking back on what was a disastrous opening game to the 2024 season. And you're thinking, okay, well, it can only, go up from there. It can't get any worse. Wrong. We find out late last night that another civil lawsuit has been filed against Deshaun Watson. The Browns releasing a statement today as follows: "We will respect the due process our legal system affords regarding the recently filed civil suit and follow the NFL's guidelines on this matter." The NFL follows up through a spokesperson on the civil lawsuit saying this: "We are reviewing the complaint and will look into the matter under the personal conduct policy." So what does all this mean for the future of Deshaun Watson this year, the rest of this year, and his tenure in Cleveland? Let's go to the hotline right now. Happy to have this guy on board with us. He's been on the show before. You can follow him on Twitter at Sports Law Lust. A sports lawyer, Dan Lust, joining us right now. Dan, how are you today?
I'm good. Pleasure to join the show. I think, Kenny, as you know, I've been following this for a couple of years, so not a shock to anybody close to the situation that something would pop up down the road, but certainly happy to break it down here.
All right, so here's what JT and I have been talking about, Dan. Is this a situation that Deshaun Watson and his people knew about, that the Browns knew about before they signed him to the contract that they signed him to, or is this completely a new civil suit that the Browns had no idea might be happening?
Okay, so devil's in the details, right? I think Mike Florio will get credit for this, pulling the contractual language, but I don't know if anybody on the radio wants to know the reps and warranties. But essentially, I guess I'll read a sentence from what Florio pulled. This player hereby represents and warrants, parentheses, except as otherwise disclosed to the club in writing. And then it goes on that he's not been charged with, indicted for, convicted, or that he's not engaged in any conduct or any circumstances that would, kind of put his playing status in jeopardy. So that's where we begin, right? If Deshaun Watson disclosed this to the club in writing, then it's not really an issue with respect to the Browns. It might be an issue with respect to the Browns. If he disclosed this and this issue popped up and it just now happened to result in a lawsuit, that's a very different story. But yeah, I guess your best guess that Deshaun Watson disclosed a number of these incidents to the club. This incident is alleged to have occurred in October of 2020. That's around the same time frame as those previous incidents. So I would think it's a good bet that he disclosed this, but we won't know for sure. And the other part, I think the nature of this allegation is quite different than the other ones that were in court previously in Harris County in Texas. So, if he just said I'm disclosing all of my material incidents with massage therapists, this is a little bit different. So that would be my guess that he's disclosed this to the team previously, but we can't say that for certain.
Dan, this, from what I've read, okay, this happened in 2020. The statute of limitations in certain states is different than in others, right? Because this happened in Texas, is it 5 years and therefore this can still be filed?
That's my understanding. It's a case that specifically involves sexual assault, so there's a little bit of a longer statute of limitations in Texas. For those, just as a kind of like recounting of history, I recall there was obviously like 20-plus lawsuits filed in court in Texas, right? And then we had this weird period of time where there was a number of women coming out in support of Deshaun Watson that provided massage services. So you had, let's say 30-plus, 40 women that were saying that they got some type of massage, one way or another, positive or negative. And then the New York Times did a report that said that I think the number was like 66 women in total, had provided massages during this period of time. So this is what I was kind of alluding to earlier. It would shock everybody if the universe of lawsuits ended with those, 20 plus that were settled, before he returned to action. If you have a 5-year statute of limitations for sexual assault and these activities seem to be in the territory of sexual assault, you got to be worried about that full 5-year window, which we're not quite at yet.
Dan, if this is a civil suit or a criminal suit, have we ever seen anything like this in sport that you could think of to whereas it would affect an active player, their contract, and, of course, the salary cap?
Not that I can recall, and not one that seems to span over years and years with no end in sight. You could tell me 2 months from now we might have this whole saga all over again with Tony Busby kind of recruiting plaintiffs to kind of come after Watson. It's certainly it's an odd situation where there are so many, and this was always the case when I went on with you guys back in the day, so many women with the same type of allegations. And this one obviously has some different elements to it that I think raise it to a little bit of a higher level. But, this is the same type of pattern that was contained in the previous allegations. So, yeah, I don't recall any type of precedent for this. You could say maybe Ben Roethlisberger, had a one or two of these, but, the number of this was always what made it unique.
It seems as though in an article that we read on one of our beat writers said that a good faith effort to settle the case was made before the lawsuit was filed. Does that tell you that it's not going to be a criminal case, that it'll only be a civil suit?
That's not necessarily something that can be controlled between the parties, right? I'm not familiar with what the section you're referencing, but if two parties want to have a civil case and there's information out there and there's a public record for potentially the DA's office to investigate it, it's not really within the party's control to say, hey, there's not going to be a criminal case attached, but hey, I'm going to go after this civilly. So, that would strike me as odd if the criminal case is completely foreclosed here.
Happy to have with us Dan Lust. He's breaking it down for us, the latest allegation against Deshaun Watson. Okay, Dan, let's look at it from a Browns perspective. This trade has not worked out. It's considered right now one of the worst trades in NFL history based on what they gave up and the results that they're getting from the player they traded for and all the headaches that come with it. So if they wanted to get out from underneath this contract of $230 million guaranteed, does this open the door for them to do that?
I hate to give you this "it depends" answer, but the short answer is it depends on what was disclosed to the team. The prior, and I don't want to say all of them, and we don't know all the facts, right? This never got to a full courtroom with a full-blown trial where we would have, had Deshaun Watson on the stand and giving sworn testimony. And alternatively, right, Deshaun Watson never sued these women for defamation after the fact, claiming that they made up these malicious lies. He kind of alluded that they were made up, but if you really think someone made up a lie about you for defamation. So I've always had my questions as to whether or not these actions occurred. You would think Deshaun Watson would have filed up with the defamation case had these things not been true. So, it depends, again, whether this was disclosed to the Browns. For the NFL's purpose, you can always put a player right on the commissioner exempt list while pending the investigation of the case. I mean, they didn't do that, with Deshaun initially, and they didn't do that with Rashee Rice. They didn't do it with Alvin Kamara. But there are previous examples where players have been put on the exempt list. Does it jeopardize Watson's status with the team? Sure. Is it possible that he gets placed down the road on the commissioner's exempt list? Sure, notwithstanding it's possible, notwithstanding the NFL's current comments. But again, whether his contract can be voided or not is really going to depend on whether this was disclosed. And my guess is that he had all hands on deck, and I would think he disclosed everything to the Browns when he was in a position of leverage, when he got that huge $230 million contract. But is it conceivable that one of these instances was not disclosed to the team? And is it conceivable that this instance isn't just a common nucleus of fact, where there's a different woman involved and different allegations on a different day, and the Browns view that as being substantially different, such that if it was not disclosed, they could treat it as a new incident? That's certainly conceivable. I really would have hoped that Watson's team put everything on the table and made all of the appropriate disclosures, but you can't rule that out at this stage.
Yeah, and for me, it would not surprise me that he didn't do that. Just with, like you said, he's denied everything, but he didn't go after them with a countersuit. So that makes me wonder. And you mentioned the commissioner's exempt list. Currently, there's a Browns player on that commissioner's exempt list, Michael Hall, for a domestic situation. So, it's going to be interesting to see what the Browns do based on the information. And then what about the NFL? Can the NFL, based on their personal conduct policy, they already suspended him, okay? Can they suspend him again if this is a new situation? But no, they can't if it's considered something that falls under that umbrella of what they already suspended him for.
You know, without getting into kind of the graphic nature of the allegations, if you guys recall, I mean, we spent so much time diving into this. The NFL didn't look and didn't suspend him for the allegations of 20-plus women. I think they isolated, like, don't quote me on this, but I think it was like 4 to 6. They took a really small subset of these cases, and that's what they analyzed. That's what went in front of, Sue Robinson, and that's what they looked at, a really small subset of cases. Now, we're not going to know which ones those were, why the NFL picked those handful, but is it possible that the nature of this allegation, the one from October of 2020 that's coming out today, is different than the ones that the NFL had previously looked at, examined, and analyzed? Yes, it's possible. So, we don't know that for a fact. The comparison between the handful of allegations the NFL actually assessed versus the one that we have now. So is it possible the NFL wants to and can find some grounds to suspend Watson again? Sure. Right? There's no black and white statute of limitations for the NFL to suspend someone for conduct detrimental to their team. So I keep that in mind. I mean, yes, we've been through this saga before. The Browns, it's maybe a Browns issue with respect to his contract disclosures, but it's an NFL issue with respect to whether or not they feel that this is a new and separate and distinct violation of the personal conduct policy.
Dan, I want to ask you a question, not in defense of Deshaun Watson or anyone else for that matter, but layman's terms. What really is a non-disclosure agreement, and why does it seem that anyone that ever signed one ends up bringing it back into a court of law?
Layman's terms, non-disclosure is you're saying you're not going to talk about some particular incident. And if you do, there's generally a liquidated damages clause or some type of penalty, some type of incentive for you not to talk about it. So let's say, for example, and we don't know the terms here, but let's say this was a non-disparagement agreement that said a liquidated damages clause of like $100,000 if you were to talk about the case, and $100,000 for every time you spoke about the case or this particular allegation. If someone thinks they can make $1 million,
okay,
it makes sense to violate the agreement.
Right.
But that's why one of these would end up in court.
And another reason, right, is if that individual was not paid the full amount that they were promised with the NDA, right, then they would speak out against it because the other side broke the contract, correct?
Correct. They would say that the NDA is null and void because the full, compensation under the NDA wasn't received. So there's a number of reasons, but assuming an NDA was valid and fully, executed and whatnot, fully paid off, someone would make a judgment call on the other end. Hey, am I going to get sued for breaking this NDA for breach of contract for this liquidated damages clause? And if I get sued, will I be better off as a result of having broke this for whatever reason? So that's generally the calculus here.
We're talking with Dan Lust. He is a sports lawyer. You can hear him all across ESPN, Fox, CBS Sports. He's a host of podcasts. What's the name of the podcast, and where can people find this, Dan?
It's very appropriately named. It's called Conduct Detrimental. So we talk about a lot of these particular issues, but we will be talking about Deshaun Watson. We are recording in about an hour and a half. So episode should be up tomorrow. Conduct Detrimental, wherever podcasts are heard.
Yeah, and you can follow him on Twitter at SportsLawLust. And Dan, where do we go from here? Now that this is out, the NFL made their statement. The Browns made their statement. There's a game this Sunday. So what's next in all of this?
I mean, I think it's going to be this uncomfortable situation where Watson continues to play. Short of Watson finding some fake injury, which I know the Twitter community thinks he's going to do, or the NFL putting him on the exempt list, I'm not sure why the Browns would have any reason to bench him. And whether this was disclosed in writing or not, that issue should be known right away, right? The second this allegation comes out, Browns legal should be looking at the reps and warranties and what was disclosed to the team in writing ahead of time. So this is really a Browns decision, short of the NFL stepping in and putting him on the exempt list. But we saw a word from the NFL earlier today that they're not currently planning on doing that. So I think this is going to be more uncomfortable situations of watching Watson play until we hear word from the NFL, because it doesn't seem like the Browns are inclined to do anything.
So, and I'm just thinking out loud here. If he does not play this week, should it be Jameis Winston gets the start on the road at Jacksonville. Can we lean even the slightest bit towards, okay, this is a new allegation that wasn't in writing when they signed him, and maybe the door is ajar for the Browns to do something? And if he does play, should we assume that, nope, they knew about this and they knew this day was going to come? Or am I making this hypothetical up too much?
You had a couple hypotheticals within the hypothetical, but Kenny, I do think it's a very good point, and you reminded me of something. People tend to forget that before Watson was with the Browns, he was with the Texans and didn't play for an entire year.
Yep.
Not because he was placed on the exempt list, not because the Texans punished him, but because we don't know. No one ever said why the Texans refused to play him. The obvious reason that they didn't play him is because he was getting charged by all these women with all these different sexual assault cases. The NFL didn't want to touch it. They didn't want to put him on the exempt list, but the Texans seem to have made a decision to not play him, even though he seemed to be perfectly healthy. So, I think if the Browns decide to sit him, you certainly can read into that. He played last week. We didn't see any type of injury or anything like that. Obviously, he didn't play that well. He's complaining of nagging soreness in his arm before that. But, I think you could certainly read into the fact that he's not playing next week. And you could probably read into the fact that they have an expensive backup, be it in Jameis Wilson, or Jameis Winston for a situation like this. So let's see. Let's see who goes out there, and let's see who's playing on Sunday. But I think it's a very fair point.
Just when we thought the book and the final chapter had been written and we didn't have to worry about this, it rears its ugly head again, and it's deja vu all over again with Deshaun Watson and the Browns. Dan, we always appreciate your information, your insight, especially on short notice today. Thanks for making time for us, and we'll talk again down the road, all right?
My pleasure.
Check him out on Twitter right now at Sports Law Lust. He is Dan Lust, sports lawyer, and he'll be doing a podcast specifically on this topic involving Deshaun Watson and the NFL and the Browns. And you can get all that information again on his Twitter handle at Sports Law Lust.